Hello, I'm sat with Alan Hollinghurst to talk about his book, Our Evenings. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Let's start with the title, Our Evenings. Did you know from the outset that your new book was going to be called that, or did that come later on in the process?
Very unusually, I knew from before starting the book, yes.
Oh.
Usually the title comes to me about 3/4 of the way through writing. So
Okay.
and I have pages and pages in my notebook of possible titles, lines crossing them out. But no, this one I had right from the start. I knew I was going to abandon the definite article, which I had in my previous 6 novels.
Okay.
It just immediately seemed to me both a beautiful title in itself and quite a kind of capacious one, and it means different things. It comes from the title of a little piano piece by Janacek, which is played and listened to and becomes rather kind of talismanic in the book. But the narrator of the book, Dave Wynne, is or becomes an actor, so his evenings tend to be spent in the theatre, and they're rather different from those, for instance, of his various lovers and eventual husband who are not actors, and who miss having him around in the evening.
Yeah.
The evening as a time of sort of relaxation, shared space, intimacy, adventure, socialising. It's just very rich in significance somehow. And it is a book written by a man in his 60s looking back. He's 13 at the beginning of the book. So that we're looking back from the evening of his own life at much earlier periods.
And it's got that lovely, that kind of duality, because like you say, he's an actor, so his evenings are spent quite, busily on stage, but sort of earlier on in the novel, his evenings are with his mother, and you really feel like it's a sacred space, and the evening kind of encapsulates that, which is really, really lovely. The book also begins with David at school, in a public boarding school environment. Why do you think this setting still remains really fascinating and enthralling to readers, even now?
Well, I'm pleased you think it does. Having been through it myself, I sort of fell back on it rather naturally. But I think if we look at our politics now, for instance, we see until the recent election, but historically how absolutely dominated British politics have been by public schoolboys, and the culture of a public school and what it does to a person. I think in this case, because David has no father and he just lives with his mother, he has this further feeling of being cut off and the homesickness and what he feels to him the sort of unnaturalness of being away at school. But also because he's clever. He takes to academic life quite well. So there's this rather ambiguous feeling about it, that he's actually being nurtured. But because he's a mixed race person, he's also being victimized. So the school is a kind of, it's a seedbed, and it's also rather a hotbed of antagonisms and prejudices and so on. I think in his earlier life, which is primary school and so on, he really hasn't been aware of these the kind of prejudices which he suddenly finds himself exposed to when he goes to public school.
And it's, in a way, I guess, kind of predictates his, role as an actor, because he's playing a role at school, and he kind of carries that energy when he goes home as well. He's kind of performing different roles and assimilating different roles as well. And speaking of his mother, Avril, is in a relationship with the neighbour, Esme Croft. And it's so rare to see 2 women in a relationship live out a long-term, happy, queer relationship. Did that occur to you? Were you thinking about that when you were writing them as characters and kind of how they naturally became a unit? Or is that, again, something that you thought of maybe at a certain point during the book?
No, that was always part of the design of the book, yes. And Dave, of course, is so preoccupied in his own adolescent hormonal excitements that he doesn't kind of quite realise what's going on between his mother and this other woman whom he naturally has rather mixed feelings about. She's rather a powerful figure, considerably richer. What's she doing? Barging into this rather intimate life that he has with his mother. Yes, but I wanted to, and I agree, it seemed to me unusual, and therefore, by that token alone, worth doing, to pick this long-term sort of loyal relationship between two women who meet in sort of early middle age, I suppose, really, and sort of stay together all the way through. I mean, thinking back to my own childhood and adolescence, I recognise that there were couples like this. Nobody ever said so or who openly identified them as such, but two women who ran a tea shop in the little town near us, and things like that, and then and they were always spoken of as an item. They were just two people, and a huge amount of that must have been going on. So I rather like the idea of just sort of stepping into this perhaps slightly surprising culture of sort of a small country town, which all around it there are these, and often women married to men, but whose main interests are lesbian.
I loved that. There's a line towards the beginning where Esme comes over and invites them on holiday. And that line that Dave says, like, we're going somewhere with Uncle Brian, though. Like, that immediate kind of guard comes up of like, I don't want you to come in. And it's such a funny line because, we're too busy to go on holiday with you to Devon. But it's the start of that kind of relationship that you do start to see. And it's just really wonderful to see. And it's just written so well. Later on in the book, without spoiling anything, there's quite a shocking moment that does take your breath away and stop you in your tracks. Again, was this something you knew wanted to happen going into the book? Or again, did it happen whilst you were writing?
It was always part of the design of the book, yes. It's actually something I'd wanted to engineer, I think, in earlier things that I'd written, and it just didn't seem appropriate. But in this case, it seemed to be a kind of inevitable thing about the story. And I'm glad it sort of comes as a surprise.
Oh, yes.
And I don't think people have sort of seen it coming generally.
And that's, no spoilers, but it's done brilliantly. There's also really lovely moments when David surrounds himself with music, classical music, and there's specific pieces that are mentioned in the book. Did you listen to them specifically before writing them in? Again, did you know you wanted to use them? And I guess, how did you come to find those pieces to weave them into the story?
Well, one of the fascinating things about writing the book, for me, I suppose, was that although Dave is sort of 6 years older than me, he's sort of moving through terrain, which I moved through myself, going to boarding school, becoming intensely absorbed in classical music as an adolescent. And so partly I was just as it were, endowing him with my own interests, and because the music was so much part of the fabric of that time for me. And because the book is very much about England and Englishness and interpretations of that, I thought English music should be an important part of it. So he's introduced by his favourite schoolmaster to the symphonies of Vaughan Williams, English composer who sort of drew on the English folk song tradition and so on. A marvellous composer, I think, who's always been very dear to me. And so I decided he'd be dear to Dave as well. And Vaughan Williams runs like a little thread through the book. And late on in the book, he finds himself actually taking part in the performance of a piece by Vaughan Williams. So it's part of the book's commentary on Englishness, but it's also a rather sort of intimate and inward part of Dave's own experience.
And I think that also ties into Dave's love of acting and performing and being very creative, which goes, I think, hand in hand with like the Englishness of the book. this love of like theatre and culture, and he's so drawn to it and he's so naturally adapted to it. Was any of that coming from your sort of autobiographical lens?
No. I think the last time I acted was when I was 6, which was also my debut.
Oh, okay.
Yes, in a play at my primary school.
What was the play?
It was a dramatisation of the episode, The Miracle at the Beautiful Gate. I think it's in the Gospel of St. Luke. I'm not sure. I was the captain of the guard, and I had one line, which was, "Guards, arrest those men." There was a terrifyingly long pause before I summoned up the courage to say it.
Oh, okay.
Now, I would love to have acted, and I've sort of acted in dreams, but never in real life. I was always much too shy somehow.
Oh, okay.
But I love the fantasy of being an actor in this book. I kind of write it from the point of view, and I'm fascinated by and I go to the theatre a lot, and I have quite a few actor friends and so on. So my last book I wrote about a painter, and books I've written about writers, obviously. And quite interesting to inhabit the mind and the sort of professional world of another artistic discipline.
Kind of a trifecta of different artistic endeavours. I like that idea as like you vicariously living kind of acting dreams through Dave in a way, which is really nice.
Well, because Dave, because of being racially distinct, he can't really flourish in the hidebound British theatre in the 70s. So he's forced out into this world of sort of experimental theatre, which is much more sort of racially and sexually diverse.
Because that's quite a big thing of the book, of how you'd say he's successful, but he never quite becomes, the breakout star. No. There's always just something holding him back. But then if you look, there's another character in the book called Giles, who's, goes to school with Dave, and he goes on his own political path of power. And he very much is on the periphery of the book, kind of comes in and out of Dave's life. And I guess you featured characters before that surround themselves with this political power. How would you say it features specifically in Our Evenings?
Well, they're set up, I suppose, right at the beginning, aren't they, as a sort of polarity, Giles and Dave. And Giles comes from the wealthy family, which is actually sort of paying Dave's school fees. So there's a peculiar sense of obligation to his family. But Giles from the start is seen as a bully. And he retains that character all the way through, and later becomes a sort of successful right-wing Eurosceptic MP, and is very instrumental in Brexit and so forth. And it was important. He just, as you say, he's not a character who sort of develops in any interesting way of his own. No. He's not kind of psychologized. No, he's just this sort of obstacle and this figure who just butts in and disrupts the narrative at various points in often really quite alarming and upsetting ways. So that, yes, I suppose there are two strands of also ideas about England and what it should be, and what Englishness is. One is this sort of, in a way, rather politically radicalised one that Dave pursues sort of on the margins of, and the other is this sort of one which will culminate in Brexit. I mean, the time span of the book is from the sort of first attempts of Britain to join the European Union in the early 1960s. It sort of finishes really at the time of the decision to leave it.
And I guess it kind of shows in a way of, the Gileses of this world will just prevail because of that awfulness and that stubborn idea of Englishness. They just kind of motor their way through, and then you've got someone like Dave kind of trying to assimilate to their own idea of what it is and never quite figuring it out. And I guess from that, a lot of early readers of the book have compared it to The Line of Beauty. It's been 20 years now since The Line of Beauty. How do you see that novel now? It's been 20 years. You won the Booker Prize for it. do you see similarities between that book and Our Evenings? Are you in a different kind of headspace when you reflect back on it? I'd love to hear.
And there are obvious similarities. That it's about, both books are about a sort of a young gay man, clever person from a sort of lower social stratum who's sort of drawn into the orbit of richer people. And we should say that Giles's parents are these sort of very wealthy but benign and sort of left-wing plutocrats. And they have a very sort of benign and fostering influence in Dave's own life. In The Line of Beauty, young Nick goes to stay actually in the house of the Tory MP, and the relationships there are much more complex and subtle, of course, than they are between Dave and the right-wing Giles in Our Evenings. The Line of Beauty is concentrated just in a period of 4 years. Our Evenings covers a period of about 60 years. So, I mean, there are big differences in the sort of scope of the books, I think. I think they're both about outsiders of one kind or another and their uneasy assimilation into larger social and political situations which they don't really understand and actually which they can never really be a part.
And it's just so interesting, kind of the ideas of power and politics, and things are out of reach but not quite, and then the Gileses of this world and his family, everything comes so easy to them, and Dave has to work 10 times harder because of being an outsider in multifaceted ways.
I mean, the role of the outsider is such an interesting one, though, because it gives you an entree into these worlds which the outsider might not have known otherwise, but he brings with him all the values and understanding from where he's come from. So,
exactly. And he's gotten he never lets it get him down. He's just always so, bright and optimistic about it. He puts on that almost the Jeeves-esque personality.
I think he has that kind of resilience, and that was quite important to me. Yes, I didn't want him to be a terribly sort of suffering person bludgeoned down by fate.
Everything,
he has this sickening feeling on the day after the Brexit referendum that Giles has won. But generally, he's quite a determined person with a strong kind of life spirit and drive about him. I didn't want it to be a sort of victim narrative. Though he is someone who's constantly being attacked in various ways. That's not what he's about.
No, that doesn't define him, which is brilliant. Did writing Our Evenings feel in any way like a significant moment for you as a writer? Because there are obviously similar things to The Line of Beauty, for example, but there's new things being talked about and discovered. Do you feel a share of significance with this book this time around?
Well, each book feels different to me. I mean, this one had the further adventure of writing from the point of view of a mixed race person, which I found something I'd been wanting to do for quite some time, to write from a different racial perspective about the world that I knew. And it seems to me actually a rather urgent thing to do. But it also has to be done with great sort of care and delicacy, and the last thing anybody wants is a sort of 70-year-old white man telling people of other races what their experience is. So lighting on this rather unusual sort of mix of races seemed to be quite an interesting way of getting into the story, and I absolutely loved sort of exploring that thing of seeing this society from that subtly but importantly different viewpoint.
It's really nice as well because through Dave and his different relationships, they all kind of come against that wall of discrimination or just the otherness. Like that brilliant scene with Hector and Dave, and this character throws her coat at Hector, assuming, he's part of the cloakroom, the facility attendant. He's actually really big RSC actor, and he just calmly, he puts her coat away, but the fury is there, but there's a resilience there as well, which I thought was really interesting.
Yes, I mean, Hector is a black actor with whom Dave has an affair, so you see in a way sort of the gradations of racism and of racial reactions, and Dave is sort of somehow found more acceptable.
Yes.
But they both have this thing of being mistaken for servants and finding themselves almost involuntarily assuming the role of servants. So this is something that
Dave especially.
Dave repeatedly does, and he's always sort of helping out and laying the table and so on.
Yeah, kind of like, the image of him sort of holding like a butler, but he's almost happy to do.
Yes, so I thought it would be more psychologically interesting if he just naturally assumed he wanted to do that because there was a sort of security in it, perhaps. Like he's got a role.
A role to play, which goes into the acting thing. Yeah, of course. And finally, how does it feel to be described as a gay literary icon?
Well, of course it's flattering. I've always written now for nearly 40 years from a gay point of view about gay subjects. I've never thought that the gayness was the entire point of the books. Indeed, it was rather the point at the beginning that one was taking all that for granted, and just getting on with writing about life from that point of view. This is, I suppose, the first book. It is the first book in which I've actually got a coming out scene.
Yeah, which is brilliant.
Before, I'd always just sort of taken that as read, get on with it. But I also feel I've been writing about all kinds of other things, It's just gay people don't spend their whole life just being madly gay. I mean, they are doing jobs and other interesting things, just like anybody else. So I suppose it's that thing of seeing what's distinct and fascinating about gay lives, and also how gay lives are actually perfectly ordinary. It's that combination of the two things, and I've loved, in a very unsystematic way, kind of chronicling those things over. I mean, probably all my books are just about sort of cover all the period between the First World War and that now. So if that makes one a gay icon, then great.
Finding the ordinariness in everyday gay life.
Yeah.